Welcome to the 8-Bit Instructor Podcast, a show dedicated to helping you level up your instruction in order to craft authentic learning experiences for both you and your students. I'm your host, Lee Tucker, a high school English teacher and ed tech enthusiast, and I want to join you on your journey to becoming the best instructor that you possibly can. So if you're ready, grab your adventuring gear and let's get going. Hey, what's up, 8-Bit crew? Today is Thursday, November the 5th, and this is episode 15 of the 8-Bit Instructor Podcast. I'm your host, Lee Tucker, a EdTech enthusiast and a Google certified trainer. So if you need some help with any Google stuff, feel free to reach out to me. Hope you guys are doing well. I've got a great episode lined up for you today. Later on, Yukais Chou joins me. He's a gamification guru. He wrote the book literally on gamification and has worked with tons of different companies and corporations to look at how game design principles can be implemented. And so he joins me today to talk about some of these gamification principles, and we look at how you can implement them into your classroom. Before we get into that, though, we've got a little bit of news and some updates. So we are in November. Hey, congratulations on making it to November of 2020. It has been a crazy year. We all know that, and it's continuing to be crazy. We just got through the remnants of Hurricane Zeta up in my area of Georgia. And so we were actually out of school last Thursday and Friday because tons of power outages and all that kind of stuff. And so we were doing online remote learning for Thursday and Friday. If any of you have experienced any of that aftermath from the hurricane coming through the southeast United States, hopefully you guys are okay. Hopefully you made it through with minimal damage, and I hope you guys are doing well. So I've got a couple of very short, very quick Google updates for you. One, Google just announced for Google Meet that you're now going to be able to replace your background with images in Google Meet. So you can use some of Google's handpicked default images, or you can upload your own image. So something similar to what some of you may have experienced using Zoom, where you can upload images into your background, which adds some of that individuality. But also, if we're looking at the idea of just personal information and all that, not being able or having to share stuff in your room, with students, sometimes they don't want people to see what's inside their house or anything like that. And so that's just another thing, along with the, blurring the background, something that's added not just as a customization feature, but also can be a privacy issue as well. So that is coming. If you're on the rapid release domains, that should have already started rolling out. Regular scheduled release domains, that will start rolling out on November 6th. So if that's something that you'll be working with, especially if you are still teaching virtually, be on the lookout for that in the coming weeks. Also, another short update for Google Workspace is the ability to set your status as away in Google Chat in Gmail. And if you don't know, Google Chat being available in the Gmail window, it's one of the ways that all of this stuff is being integrated together. You'll have the ability to change your status to being away so that maybe people won't expect a reply from you immediately. On the screen cap that I'm looking at right now, it just looks like it's right up in the toolbar next to the search in Gmail, and it's just a pull down menu that you can set and change as needed. So again, just a short little update there from Google that has started rolling out already in the rapid release domains, and will start rolling out in other domains in by around November 12th. And so again, something else coming here in the next few weeks. that's pretty much all I got this week for news and updates. Not a whole lot going on other than November being here. And at this point, the election is done. So hopefully I will stop getting all these text messages and mail ads for all these political folks, and we can just hopefully move on and deal with what may come. So with that being said, let's go ahead and take a look and see what we have today inside the treasure chest. So my treasure chest tip for you today is one simple word, really, and that word is gradients. Here's what I mean by this. So if any of you do a lot of stuff with Google Slides or possibly even with Google Drawings, anything dealing with design and visuals and all this stuff, if you notice, a lot of the colors and all that are very solid default based colors. One tip that I would throw out there for you is to start using gradient colors. And what that does is that kind of softens up some of the colors a little bit, especially for something like a background where you have a big block of color. Adding that gradient, even if it's just a very small change in color, can really help. So to get to the gradients in something like Google Slides, it's just in the color option menu. So say you're picking a background color or a fill color. Typically, when you pull that pull down menu, you've got a palette of single colors. But if you look at the top of that menu, you'll see to the right of that color is gradient. And you can click on that, and there are some default preset gradients that are available. And all you got to do is click on them and it will add that to it. And if you do that, I'm sure you'll notice just the very subtle difference, but how much better a lot of things can look when you use one of those gradient features. The other thing that I like to do is to do some custom gradients to go along with some color schemes and all that. And if you want to do that, you can add custom gradients in that same menu. And I will throw out this a website that I use a lot, and I'll put it in the show notes. It's UI Gradients. It's uigradients.com. And it's got a lot of color gradients already done, and it gives you the hex code, which is that 6-digit number that goes along with every color. And what you can do is you can go to that site. You can filter it by color, and you can look and find a gradient that works really well for you. And when you click on it, you'll see the two different codes for the two different colors. And then you can go into the custom color part of Google Slides or Google Drawings, and you can actually add that to it. And so it gives it a nice little unique, appealing look to slides or drawings. So definitely make sure you check that out. Adding gradients to shapes or to backgrounds or anything like that can be a super useful way of just taking your slide presentations, your graphic presentations, and just upping that quality factor. All right, so all that is taken care of, and we're getting ready to move on into the boss battle. So next up is a really great conversation with Yukais Chou about gamification, what it is, how we can do it to help improve student engagement, and that is coming up next. Today I have with me Yukais Chou. Yukais is an author and international keynote speaker on gamification and behavioral design. He's the original creator of the Octalis framework and the author of Actionable Gamification, Beyond Points, Badges, and Leaderboards. He's currently president of the Octalis group and the founder of Octalis Prime, a gamified mentorship platform. Yukais has been a regular speaker and lecturer on gamification and motivation worldwide, including at organizations like Google, Stanford University, Lego, Tesla, TEDx, Boston Consulting Group, Turkish Airline, governments of the UK, Singapore, South Korea, the Kingdom of Bahrain, and many more. His work has affected over 1 billion user experiences across the world. And today he's going to hit the highlight of his career and be on my piddly little podcast, right?
Yeah, I was. That's the year resolution I set for myself.
Right,
finally get that spot.
Little podunk teacher from Georgia. So before we get into kind of the meat of this stuff, I got a little would you rather question to just kind of get us going. So, personally, would you rather be able to see 10 minutes into your own future or 10 minutes into the future of everyone else except you?
Yeah, interestingly, we actually had that exact question 2 weeks ago in our own company Toastmaster practices. Yeah, I was not called to answer it, but everyone thought about it. So, what my answer is, I would rather see 10 minutes into my own future, because the reason is, if I really wanted to see someone else's future, I could just go to them and I'll see what happens to me 10 minutes later, and what I see 10 minutes later, and I'll see everyone else's future too. But if I only see someone else's future, then I can't control where that person will go, what that person will do, so I'm stuck there.
Okay, so kind of playing the system, huh?
Yeah, so one gets benefits of both of them. I wouldn't be able to see the future. If I see them on TV, I can see their 10-minute future, but I wouldn't. The limitation is I wouldn't see someone's future if they're just in a different country. I don't have access to them.
Right.
But I'm willing to take that sacrifice.
Awesome. So as we kind of begin with this, so you've spent a lot of time, a lot of years working on this idea of Octalis gamification. So what's kind of the story of how you came to all of this?
Yeah, so in 2003, I was a very heavy gamer, and I spent thousands of hours mastering different games or leveling up my characters. And then at that point, I was playing a game called Diablo 2, and my friends started moving on from the game, so I quit too. And I just felt extremely, extremely empty. I felt, I spent all these hours getting my in-game characters to have good gear, good levels, a lot of gold. But after I quit the game, I have nothing, and a big part of my life just disappeared. So I thought, wouldn't it be amazing if I spent those hours learning a new language or playing the violin? I would actually be high level in the real world, not just in a game. So then I became obsessed with two topics. One was how to create games where the more hours you spend on it, the better your real life is. And the second one is how to make just life in general more fun and interesting. Okay. So that led me down to the path of creating this thing or pioneering this field called gamification, which led to the creation of the Octalis framework and the 8 core drives.
Okay. So 8 core drives, those are essentially just like the underlying principles behind all types of gamification, right?
Yeah, so I'm known for this Octalis framework, and it's literally the combination between octagon and analysis. So It breaks down all human motivation into 8 core drives. So everything we do is based on one or more of these 8 core drives, which means that if there's none of those 8 core drives there's zero motivation. And then out of those 8 core drives, there's what we call white hat motivation versus black hat motivation. White hat motivation makes people feel powerful, in control, they feel good, but there's no sense of urgency, so they procrastinate. Black hat motivation makes people feel more urgent, obsessed, even addicted, but in the long run, it leaves a bad taste in people's mouths because they feel like they're not in control of their own behavior. And then there's what we call intrinsic versus extrinsic motivation. One, you do it for the reward, purpose, or goal. For the sake of education, you're doing it for the certificate, you're doing it for the diploma or the grade. but you don't care about the activity itself. So once you obtain the certificate, if you finish your exam, you don't care anymore. You forget your materials, or you stop studying about it. Whereas intrinsic motivation are things that you just enjoy doing, to the point that you're going to pay money just to experience it. And even if you lost all your progress the next day, you would still want to do it constantly today. Just like in high school, we hang out with the same, a lot of times 2 or 3 buddies every single day for hours and hours, and it never gets old, right? You don't need a progress bar, you don't need money, there's no real progress. You don't friendship score increased by 10, none of that. You just enjoy each other. And even after most of us, in our adult lives, we think back to that, it's like, oh, I wish I could go back to that, right. As opposed to, I can't believe I did that for 3 years without getting anything, right? Most people are fond of that. So the Octalis framework understands, first of all, if there is motivation, and then 2, what's the nature of it.
Okay. And so you've broken that down into kind of these 8 core drives. And I know you could probably go really in depth with each of these 8, but could you give us maybe just kind of like an overview of what each of those kind of entails?
Yeah, for our time, I'll list them off without actually giving many examples. The first one is epic, meaning, and calling. So you're doing something because you feel like you're part of something bigger than yourself. So if you're doing something for honor, patriotism, you're saving the planet, sustainability, you're helping third world countries. Core drive 2 is development and accomplishment. You feel engaged because you're improving yourself, you are having progress, you're achieving mastery. Core drive 3 is empowerment of creativity and feedback. So you're utilizing your creativity, you're empowered to take autonomous choices, and you get to express things. So it makes you pretty happy. This is on the right top of the octagon, which means it's a white hat intrinsic motivation core drive. That's the longest lasting type of core drive. Every timeless game has that core drive in it. Core drive 4 is ownership and possession. So basically it says because you feel like you own something, you want to improve it, you want to protect it, and you want to get more of it. So it is like collection sets, collecting stamps, badges, earning money, organizing your folders. So since you want to protect what you own. Okay. Core drive 5 is social influence and relatedness. So that's everything we do based on what other people do, think, or say. So it's collaboration, competition, social appreciation, gifting, things like that. Core drive 6 is scarcity and impatience. So this means we want something just because we can't have it or it's exclusive. So if it was abundant, we don't really care. But because there's only 3 left, or you're not allowed to do something, we suddenly want to do that. Core drive 7 is unpredictability and curiosity. So that's basically saying because we don't know what's going to happen next, we're constantly thinking about it. So that's like what the gambling industry uses. That's why we like to finish a book or a movie. That's why we binge watch Netflix. So this is on the right bottom. So it's intrinsic. Our brains enjoy it. But as black hat, we feel out of control. So we wanted to go to bed at 10 p.m., but we binge watched Netflix till 4 a.m. in the morning. So our brains enjoyed it, but we felt we weren't in control of our own behavior. So that's one way to use the Octalis to look at our behavior. Core drive 8 is loss and avoidance. So pretty straightforward. You're doing something to avoid a loss. You don't want something bad to happen. You're doing it to avoid punishment or getting a low grade, and that's why you do the activity.
Okay.
Yep, so those are the 8 core drives.
So a lot of this has to do with the idea of motivating, not necessarily the I guess the game itself. Is that right? I don't know if...
Well, if you think about what games are pure motivation engines. Like, there's no other purpose of a game than just to motivate you to do desired actions that are fabricated, right? Other things, you have to take your pills, you have to exercise. Those have an actual purpose and reason for it, and hopefully they have enough motivation to drive your behavior. But games, the moment a game is no longer fun, you leave the game, you play another game.
Right.
Go check your email, go to YouTube, right? So games only exist to change our behavior and motivate people. You spend money in some virtual coins to get a sword that allows you to kill monsters 20% faster. These are all fabricated reasons. If the game didn't exist, none of this makes sense.
Right.
So that's why when we think about gamification, we're not thinking about creating a game. We're thinking about how games create environments, basically stimuli on the brain that makes us want to do activities. And whereas games use all of these game design techniques to get us to do things that don't benefit us in real life. Generally, there's a lot of study that says we still improve in many ways. Gamification is applying that same psychological understanding and motivation, behavioral science to do important things like learning or exercising or manage your finances.
Okay. So, and I think a lot of times, sometimes when people hear the idea of like gamification, maybe they get more, maybe a little confused with like game-based. I know in education, a lot of times I hear something like, I don't have time to play games in class, but it's not really that. It's about putting other things in place to, I guess, make it more enticing to do the things that we do in class, right?
Yeah, so if you talk to different people in the industry, they'll have different definitions. Some people just think, adding points and badges and leaderboards is gamification. That's it. That's the definition. Some people do think, you need to play like a game. Some people think serious games or game-based and scenario-based learning is not gamification at all. I take a broad definition. I think the word gamify literally just means to make game-like. And the question is, okay, what does it mean to make more like a game, right? Is it animation? Is it points? Whatnot? In my mind, it's really the ability to drive engagement, get us from, I'm only doing it because I have to do it, I'm going to do the bare minimum, to, I really want to do this, I want to become the best, the most awesome I could be. And that level of engagement is, in my mind, what gamification is, utilizing what games understand to drive useful activities.
Okay. So if we're kind of switching over, talking about maybe implementing this kind of stuff in let's just say like a typical classroom, if a teacher is looking to maybe utilize some stuff like this with motivating students in class, how are some ways that you could use these 8 core drives to maybe boost motivation or get students more engaged than maybe would normally be in class?
Yeah, so I have actually online gamified education platform. It's called Octalis Prime. It has a online membership, and actually the biggest demographic of it is educators and teachers. So we have UX designers and policymakers, and teachers are really excited about doing this. And there's a variety of things they're doing. Like I said, it depends on, some people like to create game-based learning, right? If you look at the World Peace Game, which is this is a TEDx talk. John Hunter created a board game, a 3-layer board games to help 4th graders understand politics and how it affects military, environmental science, energy, and all diplomacy. And they said it's a 2-week board game, and everyone learns a tremendous amount more than reading a book. So, this taking something, so it's taking normal materials and making it more gameful. That's one path people do. Some people use software like Classcraft. So Classcraft is a software used in the classroom, physical classroom, and basically it's RPG role-playing game, so each student will have their own characters, but the teacher will be on stage saying, all right, who knows the answer to this? And then if that person gets it right, their character, let's say they're fighting a boss, and if the person doesn't know the answer, the little boss creature will attack the character, and then their teammates have boosters, power-ups, like, I'm a tank, so I can tank this damage for you. Okay. So it's a little bit more of that, making that more interesting. Then we can go back to more of the fundamental things, just the 8 core drives. So I made a video about whether tests make students feel accomplished, right? Because that's core drive 2, development accomplishment. And I talked about tests is kind of like boss fights in a game, but it's basically a very difficult challenge that utilizes all the things you've learned and you've done up to this point. Right. The problem is, for boss fights, gamers really like it. They're excited about it and they really want to tackle it, but students really don't like tests. Even students who are very good at tests, they usually don't like it, right? Teachers will say, we make people feel accomplished, but again, almost no one likes tests. Right. And so you can look at games, at boss fights, and understand, okay, what is the actual difference? And you'll realize that, for usually in most games, a boss fight is you get to choose when you're ready to tackle it. Okay. So it's like, I'm ready, let's go, as opposed to, it happened to me, and you feel like I don't have a say. Right. And in a game, if you lose the boss fight, you actually know that, I didn't win because I didn't have these skills, or I'm not good at this. You go back, you practice, and you level up, then you come back, challenge it. So it makes sure that you can defeat the boss before he moves on. And in school, you take the test, and then you get a C-. It gives you a stamp like, you're a dumb student, and then, okay, let's move on to the next one. We don't really care if you're a bad student. Let's move on, right? And so you're basically being just stamped like a bad student or a good student the entire. So it's not really making sure you've learned the material. It's really just labeling you.
Okay.
And so people don't like this labeling, and they get stuck the whole time. So. And there's a few other components about tests versus boss fights, but the thing is that previously it was very difficult to implement this, right? Because while everyone does have to move on, there's the course selection, all that stuff, and the teacher has limited abilities to keep everyone at a different pace. But I think with new technology and digitization, this becomes more and more possible. Everyone has their own learning material, their learning pace, and their own assessments, and the teacher is there to serve as a guidance. Because before teachers delivered unique knowledge, right? But nowadays, everyone looks at the internet, and a lot of them have more trivia knowledge or a lot of different things, and they can tell the teacher's wrong and all sorts of things. So the teacher's role as the knowledge champion has diminished a lot, and I think it's going to be diminished more and more.
Right.
But the teacher's there for emotional support, for guidance, for context, and giving them confidence. I talked about a lot of people when they choose their college majors, you ask them why. They'll say, it's because I have a really good chemistry teacher who believed in me. It's like, well, but you were amazing at math. You got A+s all math tests. Like, well, I was just good at it. Doesn't mean I'm going to major at it, devote my life to it, right? And you can see how a teacher who has this, what we call Core Drive 5 social influence and relatedness, is the biggest thing, in terms of it. And it really doesn't take a whole semester of mentorship. In my own experience, and a lot of my friends, it only took 2 to 3 conversation with the teacher. You felt the teacher really cared about, really believed in you, to really say, I believe, I really like this course now. I really like this subject matter. So we're going from like hardcore game design and gameful learning to just, I think, little implicit things that motivate human beings that I think anyone can do.
Yeah, and that makes sense because I was a math guy in high school, but I ended up teaching English and it was because of an English professor that I had in college. So it makes a lot of sense, kind of hearing that. So last thing, as far as the Octalis stuff, if you had somebody, I know you said educators are a big part of the Octalis website and all that. So I think sometimes looking at this, you're talking about creating a game platform and all that, which might seem a little bit overwhelming to some educators. What would be maybe some initial kind of practical suggestions that somebody who's interested in implementing some of these ideas into class, what might be some easy steps that they could take to get into it?
Yeah, so like I said, there's a variety of things people can do, and most of the time teachers, if you're a teacher in a classroom, you don't have a lot of power budget to do a lot of things, right? So sometimes we design cutouts, even from kindergarten, right? Literally saying, here's a gold star on your little box on the calendar. That's what people consider motivation, right? That's literally Core Drive to develop an accomplishment design. But then the things I mentioned about, just expressing belief in your students at Core Drive 5 social influence. So those are easy. One thing that we talked about that you mentioned is the point of scenario-based learning. So how do you give people what we call Core Drive 3 empowerment of creativity and feedback? Also epic meaning calling why they're learning something. So most of the time the teacher focus on the what and the how, but not the why. So like when I was studying math in high school, like cosine, sine, I thought those were the most abstract things ever. It's just random things you learn in math class to prove you were smart or not. But I didn't know, wow, like if I want to be a scientist, sound waves, these all become relevant. And if you watch, and I think like movies like The Martian is very good. He talks about how he survives on Mars as a botanist, and like, hey, look, he's just talking about like middle school, high school chemistry. Right? Those are actually useful. So I think it's important for teachers to emphasize the why, but also the scenario-based learning. So, for instance, instead of just giving people lectures and after lecture about, let's say, World War II, give people something that utilizes their creativity. Like, oh, if you could change one thing in World War II, what would it be? Right, and then they have to think. They have to obviously one event, and they have to understand, hopefully, most of the events to really know what they're talking about. Right. And they'll say, "Oh, I will change this because if we don't have this, then there wouldn't be this first attack." That the teacher, being the more knowledgeable, hopefully at that point can say, "Oh, but if this event didn't happen, then wouldn't this other thing happen, or wouldn't that trigger this other country to be really upset?" So how would you deal with that? And so now the student starts thinking about it more. And I think that's the best type of education in terms of you actually have exertion. And this is literally why games are engaging to them. Because everything else, they're just being crammed knowledge, like study this, absorb this, but you really don't matter. You're just regurgitating it on a piece of paper. Games, you get to choose, you get to make choices, you get to see the consequence of your choices. And I think that's one of the biggest things teachers can do in a classroom. Number one is to constantly reinforce, not just day one when you're talking about the syllabus, but constantly reinforce why learning this is useful, that it could actually change a person's life or the world in general. And the second one is allow them to be in scenario-based learning environments more as much as possible.
Okay, and those aren't even, those don't take at least initially a lot of kind of overhauling to do, so relatively easy stuff to implement.
It takes thinking and design and care, but it doesn't take budget and other resources. Right. Cool. And technology.
Well, we have just a couple of minutes left, so we're gonna finish up. Give me, what's your favorite game?
My favorite game, I think all time historically, would be StarCraft 1. It's mind-blowing. Nowadays, the game that I play the most, I enjoy, is Heroes of the Storm. Okay. So I'm a big Blizzard fan, although they have been decreasing in some quality.
Oh, yeah. Well, cool. Well, Yukais, I really appreciate you being on here, and we'll put information up in the show notes to get connected to Octalis and all that for anybody who's interested in learning more.
Sounds great. Thanks for having me.
All right, so this week's question of the week deals with this idea of gamification, and what I really want to know is what are a couple of ideas that you have for adding some gamification factors into your classroom. Now, what I mean by that is we don't have to do a complete overhaul of our classroom. We can take things that we're already doing, and then we can change them and tweak them into a gamification type of thing. So, for example, instead of just doing like a standard review with my students, I have done what I call a stump the teacher game. And basically what it is I give them that topic and they have to come up with questions about that topic, assessment types of questions to try and stump me, to come up with questions that I cannot get right. And again, it's reviewing over the material that we just did, because they're pulling information from their notes and from the activities and all that we've done in class. But I just reframed what we're doing with it to make it a little bit more engaging. So what are some of your ideas for things that you can do or things that you have done in class to add a little bit of a gamification element to them? And then just think about ways that you can take some of these ideas that Yukais talked about to boost that engagement with students, to give them more of a gamification type of atmosphere. Because the reality of it is games are very much a part of our culture. And so if we can take those ideas, not just to turn them into games that we play in class, but to actually change the way students approach the content of our class, it can help them get a lot more engaged with the content that they're doing, things that would typically possibly be what they would call boring, but when we change that packaging, it can make it a lot more engaging. So hit me up with your ideas, post your thoughts on Twitter. You can tag me at Comic Socks or use the hashtag 8BitCrew. That's the number 8BitCrew. Well, that will just about do it for this episode of the 8-Bit Instructor. Thanks for tuning in and listening. And many thanks to Yukais Chou for joining me today. Make sure to follow him on Twitter at Yukais Chou or check out his website, yukaichou.com. And definitely I would 100% recommend taking a look at his book, Actionable Gamification Beyond Points, Badges, and Leaderboards. It's a great book that has some great ideas that you can take and put into the classroom. If you enjoy the show, make sure to hit subscribe on whatever app you use to listen to podcasts and leave me a review and a rating. And please share the show with other folks and help us to build up this community to help teachers level up their teaching craft. If you want to support the show, you can help me out by donating to my Patreon page. That's patreon.com/8bitinstructor. So on that note, we'll wrap this up, and I'll see you guys next week. Until then, keep leveling up that teaching craft, and may your swords stay sharp and your shields hold strong. Thanks so much for listening. Be sure to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts and check out the 8-Bit Instructor YouTube channel for EdTech tips and tutorials, as well as other content on my website, 8bitinstructor.com. And of course, don't forget to follow me on Twitter at Comic Socks and use the hashtag 8BitCrew. See you next week. Until then, keep leveling up that teaching craft, and may your